Tomorrow everyone, Silvershire here, and welcome back to Palette Swap, where I rank the costumes and character designs of your favorite fighting games. This episode is going to be a little different than usual, because now that Tekken 8 is out, I'm going to be going over all the new costumes for characters I've already covered. That means there's no lore segment, so let's do this thing, I guess. First up is Kazuya. His 1P is pretty similar to his Tekken 7 1P. The main difference is that his trench coat is considerably bulkier. Its collar and lapel are more prominent, and it has straps dangling off the sides. This imposing silhouette suits Kazuya's villainous role, but in motion it looks kind of stiff and awkward. He reminds me of a kid being forced to wear a bunch of layers to go play in the snow. The scale pattern on his coat is more noticeable than it was in the last game, which is nice, and he's wearing his iconic gloves, which add a much needed splash of color to the design. Speaking of color, I like that his palette incorporates some purple and red, though the blacks and grays of his suit sort of blend together. His Tekken 7 1P had better value contrast. 7 out of 10. This costume's alternate color is white. It looks fine, but it's lacking in variety compared to the default. It could do with some more accent colors. 6 out of 10. His 2P is an iteration of his classic karate uniform. This is the first update it's gotten since Tekken 5, and as much as I like that version, it's nice to see something new after 2 decades. In addition to flames, his pants now feature a snake and a lion. Twitter user Sony Canvas speculated that these symbolize Kazuya's parents. In Japan, there's a myth that lions throw their cubs off cliffs to prove their strength, just like Heihachi did to Kazuya. There's also a legend about a woman named Kiyohime who transformed into a fiery snake to kill a monk who rejected her advances, which is kind of similar to Kazumi transforming into a fiery devil to kill Heihachi. The rest of Kazuya's outfit is mostly unchanged, although his gloves now go further up on his forearm like they did in Tekkens 1 and 2 instead of stopping at the wrist. I think this is the best take on his classic look. 8 out of 10. The next costume is a spoiler for Chapter 6 of Story Mode, so fast forward to the timestamp on screen if you'd like to skip straight to the King costumes. Okay, when Kazuya absorbs the power of Azazel, he becomes True Devil. This is similar to his final form from Tekken 7, but I don't think it works as well, because it's just so busy. He's covered in crystals and scales and all sorts of craggy textures that muddy the design. He barely even looks like Kazuya anymore. He looks like a Devil May Cry boss who would get sidelined by Virgil in the final act. I'll give it a 5 out of 10. King's 1P is more complex than his usual designs. He still has a cape like in Tekken 7, but now it's attached to an Aztec-inspired neck piece with multicolored feathers, beads, and a jaguar medallion. The rest of his outfit is more traditional, but it's covered in asymmetrical patterns and logos. I think there is a missed opportunity to incorporate some different words and phrases into his branding. Like, look at this. King, 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 a K that stands for King, 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 and Anger of the Beast. We get it, your name is King. Some of these could have been replaced by the names of his signature moves or something like that. His color palette is mostly blue and yellow like in Tekken 7, but he does have a few cyan and purple accents. This is a bit too busy for my liking, but it's cool that it leans into his over-the-top wrestling persona. 8 out of 10. This costume's alternate color is black and red, which sounds good, but it doesn't really commit to that. Most of the blue and yellow is unchanged, so it's hard to even notice the difference at a glance, and once you do notice, it makes his palette overcomplicated. 5 out of 10. His 2P is a Day of the Dead inspired outfit decorated with fringe and marigold patterns. His mask is still jaguar shaped, but it's more stylized and made of the same fabric as the rest of his clothes. I like that this costume taps into his Mexican heritage, because that's surprisingly rare for King costumes. However, I have a couple issues with it. The first is that his head is really small. That's true of his 1P as well, but his normal mask makes it less noticeable. The second is that he just has his regular jaguar tail, which looks out of place without his regular jaguar head. On the bright side, this is a great palette. The gold pops nicely against this super dark blue, and it's reminiscent of King's usual colors while still feeling unique. 6 out of 10. I already talked about Jin's 1P, so we'll skip straight to the alternate color, which is red. Red is my favorite color, as well as Jin's signature color, so I'm very glad this is an option. It doesn't look as heroic as the white version, but I think that's fine since this isn't the default. 8 out of 10. Like Kazuya, Jin's 2P is a new take on his classic look, but I don't think it works quite as well. His pants now feature a large, demonic face reminiscent of a Hanya mask, which looks awesome and makes sense for someone with the devil gene. However, I really miss the flames. Fire has been an iconic symbol for Jin ever since his debut. It's been part of at least one, if not both, of his costumes in every single game. He also has long gloves under his gauntlets, which is a cool idea, but they cover up most of his tattoo. Perhaps this was meant to symbolize his rejection of the devil gene. If that was the intent, designers could have made it more clear by entirely covering the tattoo, and only doing so on his left arm. It probably sounds like I dislike this costume, which isn't the case. I just don't think it lives up to the high standard of his Tekken 6 2P. 8 out of 10. Devil Jin's 1P fully leans into his gothic edgelord persona, and I am all about it. He utilizes triangular shaped language, which makes him look dangerous and aggressive. And even though he's wearing a ton of layers like Kazuya, his silhouette isn't quite as bulky. His outfit is reminiscent of Vanilla Jin's Tekken 6 1P, which makes sense, because Devil Jin represents everything that Jin hates about himself, and Tekken 6 was when Jin was at his worst. 9 out of 10. This costume's alternate color is red, which I like for the same reasons as Jin's, even if it is less gothy. 9 out of 10. His 2P is mostly identical to his classic look, but he's now wearing a feathery jacket and has some extra gold on his pants. These aren't bad additions, but they're unnecessary fluff in my opinion. I prefer the simple elegance of the original version. 7 out of 10. The next costume is a spoiler for Chapter 14 of Story Mode, so fast forward to the timestamp on screen if you'd like to skip straight to the Lee costumes. After a battle in the center of the mind and a conversation with his mom's Force Ghost, Jin purifies the devil within and becomes Angel Jin. This design bears some similarities to Kazuya's transformation, but it's more streamlined, which I think makes it a lot better. His body has a consistent metallic texture, his silver and gold palette is simple but appealing, and his face hasn't changed much, so he still looks like Jin. Speaking of which, I like that there are some aspects of Devil Jin in this design. He still has pale skin, horns, and markings on his chest. It shows that this is a purified version of the Devil Jin rather than a totally separate angel form. I do have some nitpicks, like how the series has consistently used white feathers to symbolize Jin's good side only to suddenly give his angel form yellow feathers, but this is just too cool for me to care. I literally gasped when I saw Angel Jin for the first time, because fans have been speculating about this for basically as long as Jin has existed. If I had seen this when I was younger, it would have blown my mind, and for that, it at least deserves a 9 out of 10. That brings us to one of Tekken 8's more controversial costumes. In my Lee episode, I said, I think there's a big missed opportunity across all his costumes to somehow incorporate the fact that he's a roboticist. I wouldn't want to have a mech suit or anything like that, but a few high-tech gadgets and gizmos would be neat. And, well, if you listen to the first half of that, strange as Lee in a mech suit is, I don't think it's an unworkable concept. The real issue is that it's just not flashy enough. Lee is an eccentric billionaire with a flamboyant fashion sense, but his armor is plain and practical. It makes sense for the generic Yggdrasil soldiers to wear this, but Lee should have something with more sci-fi flair. Even his color palette is dark and mostly monochromatic. At least there's still a unicorn motif. 4 out of 10. This costume's alternate color is white and blue, which is fine, I guess. Doesn't change how I feel about it. 4 out of 10. His 2P is more in line with his typical style. I like his vest. It's covered in these ornate patterns and fancy gold decorations that just scream Lee, and the coattails give him a regal silhouette. The sash around his waist is also a nice touch. Unfortunately, the rest of his outfit is just okay. The shirt, gloves, and pants are pretty plain, and his shoes have a bit of detail but not as much as in Tekken 7. This costume also lacks any of Lee's usual motifs, like unicorns, roses, or the Violet Systems logo. I do like how bright his color palette is. The abundance of white keeps the saturated blue and red from looking garish. Plus, it's shiny, which makes Monkey Brain happy. 7 out of 10. Last but certainly not least is Yoshimitsu. His 1P is a return to form after the weirdness of Tekken 7. It's very similar to his Tekken 3 1P, but now with big pointy shoulders and a long scarf, the latter of which I'm always a fan of. It also seems to take some inspiration from his Soul Calibur 6 1P, such as the glowing eyes and mouth and the blue, red, and gold color palette. I can't believe I'm saying this, but I think they managed to top Tekken 3. This is everything I want out of a Yoshi design. It has a clear samurai influence, it's intimidating without looking too evil, and it still has a bit of that whimsical charm that makes Yoshi so endearing. It is easily a 10 out of 10. This costume's alternate color is gray, green, and purple, which makes it look even more like his Tekken 3 1P. Aside from the glowing sections, it's a much less saturated palette, which highlights his serious, almost sinister side. I think the brighter colors of his default palette are more interesting, but this is a decent alternative. 9 out of 10. His 2P is based on a yaksha, which is a type of Buddhist nature spirit. This costume reminds me a little bit of his Tekken 5 3P, except it's way cooler. It's equal parts alien, demonic, and divine. His skeletal face and jagged armor make him look like a terrifying monster, yet the jewelry and ornamental sash imply that there's something noble or even holy about him. There are pulsating lines of energy all over his body, which really sell his otherworldly power, and the fiery wheels on his back give him a really interesting silhouette. My only complaint is how little armor he has on his chest and arms compared to the rest of his body. It looks imbalanced and not for any purposeful reason. 8 out of 10. And with that, we have ranked every single new Tekken costume for a handful of characters, not counting the unlockable variations. Anyway, that's just my opinion, so what do you think? Let me know in the comment section down below if you agree or disagree with any of my rankings. In the meantime, thank you so much for watching, I hope you enjoyed, and until next time, I bid thee farewell. So remember